We have a government that is underfunding and undermining our NHS, and many people are being forced to go private. And if you or a loved one is in desperate need of healthcare, and if you have the money, it's the most natural thing in the world. But can you trust private healthcare? You might want to be a bit careful because a new article has just highlighted the extra risks of going private for the individual patient in terms of safety. And what that means is that we have yet another reason why the NHS, properly funded, publicly owned and publicly delivered, is the only way forward in terms of tackling waiting lists. Welcome everyone. My name's Kat and this is We Own It Live. We Own It campaigns for public ownership. We're here with you because we believe in public services for people, not profit, and we want to do something about it. Thank you so much for being here. This is our first ever YouTube Live. Please do put your comments, questions and thoughts in the chat and we'll do our best to get to them in the Q&A. At the weekend, a game changer of a story came out in the Sunday Times. It was called You Can Pay for Private Healthcare, but Can You Trust It? And it was by Sean Linton, the health editor of the Sunday Times. Over 250,000 people last year dipped into their savings or even took out a loan to go private, a record high. And this year it may be even higher. And no wonder when we have 7.6 million people on a waiting list and doctors are being forced to strike because their pay hasn't kept pace with inflation. Patients, of course, want to get the healthcare that they need and deserve. And we can see from a slide here the way that the numbers are increasing of people going private. But what this article in the Sunday Times also highlighted is that there are real risks with this because of the incentives that private doctors have. So if we turn to the next slide, we can see the ways in which the private sector actually carried out unnecessary surgery and essentially harmed patients in a number of cases. And these successful cases, negligence cases, were taken to court. So it's really important that this story was in the Sunday Times. And the person who first spotted this story is Johnbosco, who is our lead campaigner, leading our campaigning on the NHS. So I'll be talking to him in a moment. But I just wanted to also highlight what the Sunday Times said about this story. So Sean Linton said, there is a difference between the NHS, which for all its faults has been a dependable, free at the point of use health service for more than 75 years, and the sometimes murky world of private doctors and the hospital companies who use them. He also said, and this is just incredibly clear from the Sunday Times, the private sector is opaque. Doctors can work as sole contractors, renting out operating theatres rather than being employees, with less scrutiny and oversight than in the NHS. They can have financial stakes in hospitals and diagnostic companies, meaning the more work they do, the more money they make. And so the Centre for Health and Public Interest, CHPI, which obviously prompted this story with their research, has found that more than 600 consultants, and I'm quoting again the the Sunday Times, has found that more than 600 consultants had shares or a stake in hospitals they sent patients to, while 77 doctors received a fee each time the equipment they owned was used for treating or diagnosing patients. And then I think really important the way that Sean Linton summed this up. He said, the NHS is no stranger to scandal and negligence, but the private sector has a specific problem that the NHS does not. There are clear cases of profits coming before patients, which is, of course, the whole point and why we campaign for a publicly owned, publicly delivered, properly funded NHS. So let's talk now to Johnbosco, who spotted this story and has been thinking about it and looking into it. Johnbosco, it's quite shocking, isn't it, this story? How are you finding it's being received, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, everyone who's showed up to witness, as Ron called it in the chat, our maiden voyage. It's really good to see some really familiar faces. It feels I was feeling a bit nervous, but as soon as I saw Mark and Ron in the chat, I thought, oh damn, okay, we are among friends. Great. Um, so in this story, as I think has the way that I like to think about it, and I put it this way weirdly in the newsletter that people would have gotten. I thought it set off a bomb at the heart of the narrative that the private sector can help the NHS deal with waiting lists in a number of ways. It obviously shows that there is a distinct demarcation between the interests that underlie the work the NHS does and the interests that underlie the work that the private sector does. And I think I've said this before, but if everybody in Britain suddenly became healthy, the NHS would be happy because they would save a lot of money. The public would save a lot of money. But if everybody in Britain suddenly became healthy, the private sector would lose out because obviously they would lose money, right? And what this story has kind of gone a long way to prove to us is that the moment you introduce the profit motive, as a lot of people like to describe it, into questions of um, how do you deal with somebody who's presented themselves to you with an illness? Do you give them the treatment that they require, or do you allow your motives to maximize profit to interfere with that process? And what Sean Linton's article proves to us is that, and this is not whatever we're going to be discussing today are not isolated cases. The article itself quotes two lawyers representing patients who deal with this, who dealt with this kind of issues, saying these are not isolated cases. This is business as usual approach, where we've seen doctors recommending the usage of equipment that they are renting out that they own. We've seen doctors scaring people that they might have cancer just so those people go get checked in a cancer test center that's owned by that doctor. We've seen a whole lot of things that shouldn't really play a role in our healthcare, and I think that it's really really important that this story um, has the kind of impact that I think it can have in making it clear that our NHS um, should sort of take precedence in terms of our thinking about healthcare in this country.
Yeah, definitely. I think that bit really shocked me as well, that the lawyers were saying these are not isolated cases, this is a pattern. And you just think, who are these doctors and what on earth are their motivations that they think this is an acceptable way to behave when, you know, you take an oath when you become a doctor to take care of your patients. And of course, you know, the vast majority of doctors want to do exactly that and wouldn't even be swayed by financial motives. But of course, there's going to be a handful who are swayed by financial motives. And if you allow the private sector to make that incentive a real one, then you suddenly open up patients to dangers that they just shouldn't be on the table at all.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose that's part of the reason why the NHS was such a brilliant innovation to begin with, right? Because obviously, before the NHS, there were charities who were providing free healthcare to some people, but by and large, healthcare was paid for. And we saw people dying for lack of access to healthcare. And we see people still dying in the US today for lack of access to basic healthcare. We see analysis showing 40,000 people dying every year from lack of access to basic healthcare in what is, for all intents and purposes, the wealthiest country on the face of the earth. We see 500,000 households going bankrupt every year. And often when people quote this stat, they describe it as 500,000 people, but 500,000 households is not 500,000 people. It's more like 2 million people going bankrupt every year from medical debt. That's something that before now we did not know about. We did not, by and large, didn't know in Britain. But obviously, it's becoming more common now with analysis showing that more people are borrowing money from payday lenders to get care in the private sector. People are begging for money online to get care. People are digging into their savings, including, I mean, this is not a poor person problem at all. I was speaking to I forget his name now, but somebody who used to work in the NHS as one of the kind of top professionals, leaders in the NHS, and he's retired now. And when I was recently running our Faces of the NHS video thing, he got in touch with us and he recorded a video for us that I believe we put out some time ago, and he was really pissed, to put it in my way, that he had to dig his hands into his own savings in order to get a cataract operation, because he went to his doctor. His doctor told him, "Don't even get on the waiting list. You're not going to see a doctor in
Why
2 years."
should people have to? Why should they have to? And I just think it's desperate when you see these crowdfunders online, people trying to raise money for basic healthcare treatment, that the NHS exists to provide. It's so going backwards. But yeah, just picking up on your point about the US and that comparison, because I thought it was really interesting that so in the article, David Hare, who's the chief exec of the Independent Healthcare Providers Network, which represents the private companies, he said, poor care is bad business at the end of the day. But I thought that was interesting because actually in America, it seems like poor care isn't bad business. Poor care seems to be a lot more prevalent than it is here. And it's actually really quite scary that the system can still function. We don't want to just terrify people, by the way. We are going to come to things you can do, and we want your ideas on that too. But we want to understand all of this and how it works. So I did just a little bit of digging into, some of these unnecessary surgeries. What's the pattern in the US? And so over half of lumbar spine surgeries in the US are unnecessary. And around a third of hip replacements also found to be inappropriate by researchers. Quite scary stuff. And so I also found this website, which if we can get the slide up of the website, look at this. This is a bunch of lawyers in the US looking at medical malpractice. So, a lot of people's, jobs being created, but I think there's better ways to create jobs, frankly. A whole team of people to deal with the amount of medical malpractice that goes on in the US. Really quite scary. But what I thought was interesting as well is if we flip forward, this website is talking about the sorts of things that happen and just explaining in very bold terms, the amount of unnecessary surgery that goes on in the US. And then on the next slide, talking about why, what is the reason behind these unnecessary surgeries? And of course, the top reason, profit. Why would you choose to run a healthcare service like that, where profit can drive doctors to carry out surgeries that aren't needed on their patients? It's just astonishing. So we don't want to be going in that direction. We need to reverse really quick and get back to the NHS properly funded so that people don't have to make these difficult choices if they're even in a position to.
I did want to jump in there very quickly on the kind of the quote that poor care is bad for business. That just doesn't make very much sense, and I don't want to pull rank on David Hayes here and present my PhD in philosophy to kind of present the idea that libertarian philosophy suggests let me not go too deeply into it, but it suggests that in order to make money in the capitalist economy, if you do a good job, people respond to the fact that you're doing a good job, and then they tell their friends and family that you're doing a good job, and then you make a lot of money from doing a good job. But we obviously know that if that were the case, then we would not have privately run water companies dumping sewage in our rivers and seas. Obviously, we need water. Water is not a choice that we get to decide whether or not we use. We would not have railway companies doing the kind of horrible job that they do, and even in more optional sectors like say cigarettes. Cigarette companies for decades and decades knew that their product caused cancer. They were not afraid that people are going to spread the word that their product was bad, and
Right.
therefore they should stop smoking or stop selling it to the masses. What matters is profit, right? And we see it in black and white in this article by Sean Linton that doctors are deciding, and it's really, really important to say this as well. We work very closely with doctors. We work very closely with the Socialist Health Association, for example, with the BMA, the British Medical Association. And by and large, doctors who work in our NHS, and even those who don't work in our NHS, I would grudgingly even offer, do a good job and don't put profit before people. Absolutely. But if you're a doctor who's inclined to not want to work in the NHS because you feel it doesn't pay you enough, then there's a very good chance you are inclined to do something that's untoward in the private sector.
Mm.
And my sense is that it's that we really that the framework of incentives in the private sector is what should be blamed, instead of paying attention to these individuals who do these things. Because obviously, if they can't do it in the private sector, they will do it. They can't do it in the NHS because profit is not the main motive in the NHS. It's cure for people.
Exactly. And I think it's about looking at, you're talking about profit as a driver, the kind of thing that a health service is. It's not a product, right? It's not like a consumer product that you get to look at in a shop and choose between. And part of that is because as a patient in the NHS, you don't have access to the full information, right? You don't have a medical degree. You haven't been through years of training. You don't understand the complexities of that. And of course, people can take a role in helping their own healthcare, but ultimately you need a well-qualified doctor who is also incentivized to put your care first. You don't have all that information. And so trying to pretend that something like choice is helpful in the context of healthcare is just an absolute nonsense, because it's an entirely different kind of thing. Not to mention that most people don't want to end up buying healthcare. If they can possibly avoid buying that particular product, then they will. So it's a crazy way to look at it, and it doesn't serve us at all.
Yeah, and most people don't want to think about these things. They want to, I become ill, I need to see a doctor, I go see a doctor. Period. End of story. We have been lucky for a very long time in Britain that that story has been fairly straightforward in this way. For a long time, we had the best healthcare system in the world. The government, this particular Tory government, for the last 13 years has been cutting and privatizing much of it, which is created, without a doubt, created this waiting list crisis that we're dealing with at the moment, which, whether or not they wanted to do it on purpose, has opened the door for the private sector to make a lot of profit from people's desperation. So it's really, really important that we are re-emphasizing the central role of the NHS. And I did, if you will, want to make a really important point about the comparison that we always make with the US, right? You'll always hear people, a lot of people who are not in favor of a fully publicly run NHS, which, to be totally fair with you, is, I think, mainly people who have some kind of interest in the private sector, because we know from our polling that 78% of the public, including a majority of Tory voters, want the NHS to be run fully publicly. They
Yeah.
will always say,
The
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So they'll always come in and say, well, why do we always have to compare to the US? We could compare to France and Germany. France is often referred to as one of the best healthcare systems in the world. There are a number of things I would say about that, right? Number one is that in 2012, 2013, we had a better healthcare system than France did, according to a Commonwealth analysis. We were not perfect then, but we were better than France. That's number one. Number two is that those people who often want to refer to France and Germany should be a lot more kind of forthright with people. If you are proposing funding going to a French model, and by that you're referring to insurance, well, people should know that they'd have to pay monthly health insurance that they don't have to pay right now. And secondly, if we funded the NHS at the rate the French government funds their system, we would be spending about 40 billion pounds more, B with a billion with a B, on the NHS per year than we currently do. And if we wanted to compare it to Germany, we would be spending upwards of 70 billion pounds a year more than we spend on the NHS.
Yeah.
And this is not our analysis, this is from the Health Foundation, right? And it's really, really important that people keep in mind that the reason why the NHS is able to do so much more with so much less is because it's, for want of a better description, and Kat used this earlier, the best insurance system that there is in the world, really, right? Because the reason why insurance costs what it costs at any given moment in any given area is how diverse is the risk pool. right? If you have too many people who are going to actually use their insurance and get care, the insurance company will go bankrupt. If you have too few people who are going to use it, then the insurance company will make out with too much profit, right? The best balance is having an equal portion of people, and
Yeah,
having a whole country within your risk pool is
yeah,
the best, and it's proven to be the cheapest. We should invest in it. Those countries should learn from us, not the other way around.
totally, totally. And I think that message about the billions more that France and Germany spend is such a crucial one for campaigners to get across, because it's so clear, and it just gives the lie to this idea that we can't afford the NHS and all this kind of nonsense, when we're just not spending what other European countries are spending, and we could easily afford it. And I think it's worth mentioning as well here, Johnbosco, the SOS NHS campaigning that we're involved in with Keep Our NHS Public. Do check out Keep Our NHS Public, and also other campaigns and organisations like the Health Foundation.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many organizations to mention that are doing brilliant work in this area. I would reiterate Keep Our NHS Public, because we work extremely closely with them. They are such amazing campaigners. People like Tony, John Pontis, who I don't want to say day and night, but it almost seems like it's day and night. They're on Sky News, they're on Talk TV, defending the NHS, demanding more funding for the NHS. They're doing a brilliant job. So do check out the work that they're doing, get involved with whatever they're doing. The Socialist Health Association is also a really important element, putting pressure internally in the Labour Party to demand that they do the right thing by the NHS. And we, of course, are continuing to do, if I do say so myself, some really important work, putting pressure on the Labour Party. We could talk a little bit more in detail about why it's really, really important to put pressure on the Labour Party. But we've also been doing, I mentioned earlier, as part of the kind of Only the NHS campaign that we launched a few months ago, with a goal of making it clear that the waiting lists must not be used as a pretext to expand the role of the private sector within the NHS. And we've already seen the government beginning to use it that way. And we cannot allow it to become normal for that to happen, right? So, but we brought together 15 of the top celebrities in the country, including people like Stephen Fry, Emma Thompson, to sign a letter that we sent to all of the health spokespeople of all of the different parties. And we also organized that Faces of the Waiting List effort, bringing together people who are stuck on NHS waiting lists, for them to make their case directly to these parties, saying to them, you are claiming to be representing us by paying all of this money to the private sector who don't have our interests at mind. What we are asking of you is invest in the NHS, pay staff what they've earned, instead of diverting money into the private sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason why we really wanted to bring you in this article, is because it's really, obviously it's depressing, obviously it's a bit scary, but it's an absolutely electrifying kind of answer to the sorts of nonsense that politicians are peddling every day about how we have to rely on the private sector. It's a really scary story. It should scare people, and it's a really useful comeback. You know, we highlighted earlier this year that outsourcing actually kills. We had an action in Parliament Square highlighting the 557 excess deaths from outsourcing. And now this is in a similar vein. It's saying, look, these policies, they are not without cost. If you undermine our NHS, people will suffer, patients will suffer. It's not okay. It's not an alternative. It's not the way forward. It's not any kind of answer. So stop pretending that it is. Now, should we take a bit of questions in the chat? We're excited to see what people are saying. Maybe you've been picking up on some of them already, Johnbosco.
Ron has asked a question about, since patients are dipping into their, let me put it on the screen, so it's easier for me to read. Since patients are dipping into their financial reserves to go private, do you see a future government moving to private health insurance system? That's a really important question. I would say, Ron, that my general, I suppose, motto is the way to put it, is that nothing is inevitable in life and in politics, right? What happens is either what we allow to happen or what we could not stop from happening. That's why we campaign. We campaign because we believe that people power can push back against this. Something that's that should be very heartening is that the latest survey of British social attitudes, which is like the gold standard of British of polls or surveys of British beliefs about things, found that upwards of 90% of the British public still believe in the founding principles of the NHS, of a fully public health service funded from general taxation, right? So they're going to have to work terribly hard to actually move us in that direction. And you would have seen a video that we put out recently on social media where we got an excerpt from an advisor of Steve Barclay, the health secretary, who was actually saying, well, we need to privatize the NHS, and we need politicians who are going to stand up and say we need to privatize our NHS. But even this man, I think his name was Leon Mirali, um, would admit himself that none of the politicians has the guts to go that far, right? So we are lucky that we are still living in a country where the vast majority of the public oppose these changes. What we need to be doing is taking advantage of the fact that the public is on our side on this issue and fighting back as hard as we can by reaching out to our MPs and making sure that they know that their constituents are opposed to whatever changes they're pushing for in the NHS, even if they're not immediately coming out and opposing NHS privatization. The more people get in touch with them, the more clear it becomes to them that they cannot really get away with doing anything like this, right? So it's really, really important, in my view, anyway, that we keep fighting. And I don't think that they're going to succeed in moving that direction, regardless of what they want to do.
I mean, of course, they have been, haven't they, Johnbosco? They've been working really hard to privatise the NHS bit by bit behind the scenes. Politicians of all parties, knowing that the public loves the NHS, saying, "Oh, we love the NHS, we support the NHS," but then cracking on with privatising it. The new integrated care systems, all of the legislation that's been passed, particularly the 2012 Act. Politicians have been doing this before that, obviously private finance initiatives. So, it is a long and depressing tale. And some campaigners have done a really brilliant job of highlighting those sneaky ways that politicians have done this, people like Deborah Harrington, for example. But as you say, the reason that we're here, the reason that we're campaigning is because we think that there is hope. And, if you even think there's a 1% or 2% chance that we could get, for example, Keir Starmer to reinstate the NHS as a fully public service, or even, a lesser goal, to insource NHS services, to row back some of the worst excesses of privatisation, then it is worth it, I would say. And just a plug here as well for campaigning, what we do it, we own it, we campaign because you can win victories. And so next weekend, we're seeing buses coming into public control in Greater Manchester for the first time. Buses have been regulated outside of London since 1986. And that is down to campaigning. So we set up Better Buses for Greater Manchester. Pascal, who led that campaign, ran a terrific campaign. And we know from our conversations behind the scenes that actually there's a really good chance that campaign pushed Andy Burnham and made him just take the extra step to bring buses into public control, which is setting off a whole range of new decisions being taken in other areas where our campaign at Matthew is now campaigning, in West Yorkshire, in South Yorkshire, in North Yorkshire. Obviously, I'm diverting from the NHS here and talking about buses, but the point is, campaigners can win victories if we're focused, if we're driven, if we really go for it and we know what we want and we know that we've got the public behind us. And so, things can change very, very fast in politics, and we have to be advocating for what we want.
Well, if we wanted to start listing our wins, then you should have told me so I could come with a list. We not very long ago managed to get this government, Boris Johnson's government, to scrap their plans to privatize Channel 4. That was something that was done by the people that are watching this right now. We on its supporters across the country. We've won victories on rail, getting rail franchises taken back into public hands. We've won victories across a whole host of areas. I would even suggest that I think we are on the cusp of another victory. A few months ago, when we started, along with the unions, campaigning to prevent the government from closing our ticket offices, it seemed as though it was impossible to do so, and we did not hear any of the Conservative MPs speaking up about it. But I think that people on this call, people who support We Own It, people, members of trade unions, have spoken up loudly enough that the public has picked up the baton that this campaign has dropped, and the MPs are now hearing this message loud and clear. If you watched the debate that happened in Parliament yesterday, and we put up some clips about it, you'd be shocked to see people like Priti Patel and what's his name, Mark Francois, Tory MPs who you could never imagine yourself agreeing with, coming out and speaking so vociferously against closing those ticket offices. So your work really can make a difference. I think that somebody once said, and I've forgotten where I heard it, but it's a really interesting thing that somebody said, and I agree with it, that in desperate times, hopeless people are totally useless to us. And what we want are people who believe that their action can make an impact. Obviously, we have to be strategic. We have to think carefully, and we are doing a lot of that and channeling people's energies productively. And that is really, really important to do. And it's something that we continue to do with input from people like yourselves watching this call right now. But it's really, really important that we fight because we can win.
Absolutely. Quick shout out to CHPI, which I can't see, various people in the chat, Christine and Margaret in the chat. Yeah, CHPI doesn't get much publicity, but it's very helpful in terms of clear, accessible information. And Margaret says, yes, CHPI is excellent. They are incredibly useful and brilliant. And obviously, they've managed to achieve a story in the Sunday Times, which is a fantastic outcome. So yeah, do check them out. CHPI will link to them in the description of this video. And their research was the basis for Sean Linton's story in the Sunday Times that we're talking about here.
I wanted to highlight, obviously, while we are trying to make this a proper live stream the way we would do it next week, for example, it's really important that a lot of people who are here listening this. So this is not open to everybody, as you obviously you know that if you got this link, it's kind of a secret invite. It's a
but Johnbosco, there's going to be this will be, unless we say something outrageous and we have to take
no.
This is going to be on YouTube in the future. So
we're not saying anything outrageous. I just wanted to point out, Mark put it on the screen. Mark says, my first impressions, you're both very good speakers. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
And he says, and this is the part that I wanted to read out loud. Kat's background would be nicer if it was a bookshelf of learned tomes and similar.
Sorry, I'm not sufficiently learned. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Also just wanted to point out that Margaret is joining us from a Bristol bus. Fantastic, Margaret. I hope you'll join us next week as well when we'll talk about buses, and we will be going live to a bigger audience. Although if you are watching this on the pre-record in the future, then do check out our videos, do find out about us, and do explore some of these links, because this will all be relevant for the foreseeable, especially ahead of the next general election. Which brings me to, unless we have more comments we want to respond to right now, our action of the week.
I did just want to kind of reiterate something I touched on earlier. Obviously, today we are trying as much as possible to make sure that we are doing as well as we can before we go to the whole of our list with this. So, and I think that from what people are saying in the comments, we are doing very well thus far. But keep in mind, obviously, that this is going to be happening at 5 p.m. every Thursday. So, and you don't need a sneaky, what do they call it? The slicky link to attend it next time. All you need to do is go to the We Own It YouTube channel. You can subscribe to it now. Obviously, you're watching us on the YouTube channel. Subscribe to it. Click the bell icon that's next to it. It comes up with a bunch of options. Select all. And what that means is that you get an email every time we go live or we post anything. So it tells you that we are going live, and just put it in your calendar to show up here 5 p.m. every Thursday.
Yeah, if you don't like bells and notifications, that's fine too. But please be here, because we're hoping this is going to be a really positive space for campaigning and a place where we can learn more about public ownership, strengthen our arguments, and then go out there and win victories. So we need you with us to make that happen. And Ron says, you cannot build a movement on despair. It requires belief you can succeed. So our action of the week is, please do sign, if you haven't, our petition to Sir Keir Starmer. It's calling on him to reinstate the NHS as a fully public service, the way it was intended, the way that Labour created it in the first place back in 1948, so it can be there for everyone and so that it's working for patients, not profit. And I think this story in the Sunday Times that we've been talking about shows why that is so incredibly important. So we're excited that the petition is at nearly 20,000 when I last looked, and we need to make it bigger. We need to make it snowball. Obviously, people may feel, oh, well, he's not going to do that. There may be cynicism. We need to give it enough of a push that we can override that and make it something that grows and grows and grows until the Labour Party feels like they have to address it. Of course, we're talking to all parties about this. We want all parties to get private companies out of our NHS. But in the run-up to the Labour conference, which is in a month's time, we are focusing on Keir Starmer. And there will be an Action at Labour Party conference too. And if you can help with that, do get in touch and let Johnbosco know. We'll be sending a really clear message to Keir Starmer. And I know that we need a few people for that action in Liverpool on the, which date?
On Monday, the 9th of October. If you're in Liverpool, it's going to be at just under the Will of Liverpool, which I thought it would be a good landmark for people who don't know Liverpool very well to show up to. We have the link for the petition in the on the screen right now. weunit.org.uk/Starmer. I imagine you would have already signed if you're here, but even if you've already signed, send the link to as many people as possible. As I mentioned earlier, there's a really clear theory as to how we can win this. Just like has happened with the ticket offices, we need to reach a point where the public picks up this fight along with us. We know that the public is on our side, and usually the politicians are banking on us deciding before we get to that point where the public picks up the fight to give up, that it's not going to happen. We know it can happen. And it's really, really important that we're targeting Labour specifically for a number of reasons. Number one is that it's the strategic thing to do. Labour is looking very good in the polls. Short of a major cock-up, they're very likely to win the next election. That is cock-up on their part. I could not care very much whether or not they win. Well, but so it's really important to target whoever it is that's going to form the next government. We would be targeting the Lib Dems if they were very likely to be the next government, or the Greens, or whoever else, right? So it's very, very important to do that. That's a strategic thing to do. So please do share around that link and get this petition growing organically. We have a few weeks to get it to a really strong number before Labour conference.
Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. And Christine says, please click the like button, people. Please do like it, comment on the video, subscribe, add notifications if you're happy to, and just engage with the YouTube channel to help the faceless algorithm of YouTube help us to promote this video and show that people like this content, that they want to see it, and that will promote it to more people. We want to reach as many people as possible on YouTube, and that's why we're going to be going live every Thursday at 5 p.m. And we're really grateful to you for joining us on the very first one. And do send us any thoughts, any comments, or pop them in the video chat. Thank you for being here with us. Do check out the links at the bottom of this video. Check out those different campaigns. Do sign the petition and share it with anyone who you think hasn't signed it and might want to. And we will hope to see you again next Thursday at 5 p.m. on YouTube. Thanks, everyone.